Oh, there's a lot of people. All those different groups and response.
Good evening. I'm Ann Toback, the CEO of the Workers' Circle. I am very excited to welcome everyone to the Poetry of Cultural Recreation, a conversation with Irena Klepfisz on Jewish and gender identity. The Workers' Circle is a social justice organization that has been defending our democracy and fighting for voter rights along with economic and racial justice for more than 120 years. Voting rights is our top priority now, as our entire democracy depends on it. In addition to programs that educate us on critical social justice issues, we collectively engage teens, college students, and people of all ages in impactful collective activism, Jewish cultural experiences, and we create meaningful connections to our rich Yiddish language, traditions, and heritage. Tonight, I'm zooming in from New York City, which is also where the Workers' Circle is headquartered. New York City is the traditional land of the Lenape people within the Lenape-Hoking territory, who continue to push back against their erasure and organize for their rights. I want to thank the 15 groups who have co-sponsored tonight's conversation with Irena. Our progressive movement is advanced by strong partnerships. All of us at the Workers' Circle are so very grateful to be building a Shenera and Bessera Welt for alle, a better and more beautiful world for all in partnership with these amazing organizations. Please take a look at all of our co-sponsors in the chat. As we mark Pride Month in 2022, amid a global rise in fascism and hatred, Irena Klepfish's poetry continues to be a wellspring for resistance, imagination, and justice. Irena is a feminist, lesbian, socialist, Yiddishist, poet, professor, and activist, to name but a few titles. She is also, we are thrilled to say, a Workers' Circle board member. During tonight's program, Jonathan Taubes, Workers' Circle's Jewish culture and justice advocate, will speak with Irena for the first part of our program. Irena will then read selections from her poetry, and then we'll turn to questions from the audience. And now I am thrilled to be turning the program over to Jonathan, who will introduce Irena Klepfisz. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne. We are incredibly pleased to welcome poet and activist Irena Klepfisz. Irena Klepfisz is a lesbian poet, an essayist, a political activist, Yiddishist, and a practicing secular Jew. Born in 1941 in the Warsaw Ghetto, Klepfisz spent part of the war in a Polish Catholic orphanage and later in hiding with her mother until liberation. After a 3-year stay in Sweden, they immigrated to the United States in 1949, and they settled in the Bronx among Yiddish-speaking Holocaust survivors who'd been active Jewish labor Bundists, or Jewish socialists, in interwar Poland. Klepfisz attended New York City public schools, Workmen's Circle Yiddish shulas, and earned her BA at the City College of New York and her MA and PhD at the University of Chicago. For 10 years, she taught college courses at the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility, and she recently retired after 22 years of teaching Jewish women's studies at Barnard College. Klepfisz co-founded and co-edited the influential feminist magazine, Conditions, was a member of the lesbian collective De Wilde Chayes, or The Wild Beasts. She co-founded the Jewish Women's Committee to End the Occupation, served as executive director of New Jewish Agenda, and she organized the groundbreaking conference Die Froyen, Women in Yiddish, which was sponsored by the National Council of Jewish Women. For many years, Klepfisz served as the editor of Yiddish material for the Jewish feminist magazine Bridges. She is the co-editor of The Tribe of Dinah, a Jewish women's anthology, the author of Dreams of an Insomniac, a book of essays, and 4 books of poetry, including Keeper of Accounts and A Few Words in the Mother Tongue, which was nominated for a Lambda Award. Klepfisz received grants in poetry from New York Foundation for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Arts. Most recently, she was a recipient of the Dreaming in Yiddish Award from the Adrian Cooper Foundation and was inducted into LGBTQ Writers Hall of Fame of the Saints and Sinners Festival. Irena's latest book, Her Birth and Later Years, New and Collected Poems, 1971 to 2021, will be published at the end of this year. Irena, welcome. It is a real privilege and treat to be able to speak with you tonight.
I'm really happy to be here, Jonathan, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. That introduction is so long, it reminds me how old I am.
With age come accomplishments, at least in your case. And anyway, we're always very, very happy to have you. So let's dive into it. Tonight's program is called The Poetry of Cultural Recreation. And that is just how the late, great Adrian Rich described your work, as doing the work of cultural recreation. So I want to ask you, in a world where hate and fascism are on the rise, how can poetry help us recreate our culture?
Well, I think that's not, that's really that's an essay answer on a final of some sort. I'm not sure that you can do a one-to-one correlation between writing poetry and the political, what's happening politically around us. I mean, there's that famous poetry makes nothing happen. And so I don't think of it in those terms. I think art in general, not just poetry, is really important for sort of human survival. For us, I think it keeps us in touch with our humanity, which often I think political situations kind of dull and make us numb. I think it keeps us alive and humane. And I think it's very important for us to have the access to works of art. I think, in terms of personally, I feel a need to write poetry, whether it changes the world or it doesn't. And when I started writing, I was not thinking of influencing anybody. I wasn't thinking of historically in any way. I was simply trying to find words for feelings that I had real difficulties in expressing. And so I'm not sure that I would phrase it exactly as you did, Jonathan, though I do think it's essential. And we know that in all kinds of the most depressed situations, we know people turn to art. We know that people turn to art in concentration camps. We know that people turn to art when they were enslaved. It's an instinct in us. Part of it is maybe witness, but part of it is also just expressing feelings and expressing and trying to make sense of what's happening around you. So I think it's not something that fascism can stamp out. It tries to. I think fascism tries to. It's one of the things that they always want to cut money for. I mean, in the United States, the cheapest thing is art in terms of the American budget. I mean, they're always trying to kill the NEA, but even if they did, it wouldn't stop the art. So I don't know if that kind of answers your question. I think it's a necessity, but I don't think it's a one-to-one correlation that it does something immediately in the world. It can, of course, certain kind of poetry and certain kind of art can mobilize people, but I think for the majority of artwork, it doesn't.
No, I love that, and I like especially what you're saying about the human instinct or impulse. I do think there is a kind of resistance there. It sounds like, like you point out, that's where the fascists always go first. And I think there's, as you're saying, there's a reason for that. We are very honored that you're a member of the Workers' Circle board, but of course you first met the Workers' Circle through the Arbiter Ring schools, or shulas, as a child survivor of the Holocaust who had been brought to the United States. Your father, may his memory be for a blessing, was a Bundist leader who lost his life fighting fascism in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Looking back on all this, do you have a sense of how these early years of your life may have catalyzed who you would later become?
Well, I mean, they made certainly a huge impression on me. Let me put it that way. It's sort of saying huge is almost an understatement. I think they stamped me in a certain way. I had very mixed feelings about them. I don't think things were explained enough to me at the time. I found the memory of the war as it was presented to me in the Holocaust memorials here in the States just terrifying. And I ultimately rebelled against them. I mean, I didn't like, they terrified me to begin with, but they also became very commercialized. And I kind of just, when I was about 15, I just refused to, I told my mother I wouldn't go anymore. And I didn't go for maybe 20 years. It took me a long time to sort of come back to that. And I'm actually quite active now in the memorialization at the Der Stein, the stone in Riverside Park in New York, which is the oldest memorial in the United States, but it's we have very simple events in April. So, I mean, it scarred me in a certain way. I wouldn't say it marked me. I think it scarred me, and it took me a long time to sort of recover. The Shula was a totally different experience. I think I came to love poetry because of the Shula. I loved the poetry. I liked the songs. I liked memorizing the poems. These were mainly the sweatshop poets. It was Maurice Rosenfeld and Avram Sutzkever. And I still remember, for example, I'll just give you a quick example. I think it's Avram Reisen, but I'm not totally sure. There's a poem, it goes a little bit like this, if I remember it correctly. Nit hoich is der Binyan mit Reichkeit nit voll, in oremer Gegend die jüdische Schul, wenn andere Schulen schon seinen vermacht, die jüdische Schul erst zum Leben erwacht. So it's about a shula, it's talking about the shul, and the shula is in a poor neighborhood, and it's not very wealthy. That's what the poem is saying. And when the other schools close, the shula first comes to life, because they were always afternoon schools, and they were evening schools. And it totally related to my life. I mean, with a poem like that, it's in its utter simplicity. My school, my shula numero 3, was the biggest shula in the city. It was 100 kids. It was in a basement. It was after school. And I don't know that I liked going to the shul so much, but I really loved the poetry and I loved the songs, and they made a very deep impression on me. English poetry never affected me because I didn't understand it. It didn't, I had to read Coleridge's, The Ancient Mariner in the 7th and 8th grade. And I didn't know what an albatross was, and I didn't know what all the Christianity was. And I didn't understand it really, most of it. It took me a number of years in high school. I finally woke up a little bit to English poetry, but the Yiddish poetry, the oral quality, the fact that it was related to your life, the fact that it was direct and it was unadorned, the simplicity of it, the voice of it, the fact that it had to be talked at, said out loud, that made I think my poetry is totally marked by that. I love voices, I love narration. I made it more complicated when I learned about other more sophisticated forms when I sort of expanded my readings. But that was my formation, was those early Yiddish poetry in the Shoah. And the Holocaust material and the war was just big part of my life. I mean, I had to learn, I think what I had to learn was how to contain it. One of my biggest worries in my 20s was that the only subject that I could write about was the war. And I didn't want to continue writing about the war for the rest of my life. So it was a problem that I had to resolve, and that I did. You know, I resolved it in my late 20s and early 30s. But it certainly stayed with me. It's not something that I rejected. I just had to learn how to contain it and how to keep the past in the past, I guess was the issue. And I think a lot of people had that problem. I don't think I was experiencing anything particularly unique. If you talk to people my age who grew up in that atmosphere, I think they had the same issue.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, you know, three of my grandparents were actually Holocaust survivors, and my father's father was also a child survivor, and they hardly wanted to talk about this stuff, actually. And so just that sense of trying to keep the past in the past really resonates. I also want to say, though, Irena, it's so incredible to me that the Workers' Circle Shul has had that impact on you, and that you say, like, you know, you might not have always wanted to go, but something that they were showing you there struck this deep chord with you.
I think the other thing that was very influential and that totally stuck with me, which was also an issue of, it was in Yiddish. It was my mother's group of friends who were all Bundisten before, you know, they were all, and some of them claimed they were still Bundisten, even though there was really no more Bund. Their conversations about the past was something that made a very deep impression on me. And I've always said this, that if I felt that the homeland that I felt that I lost was interwar Poland's homeland, because they made life, not that it was beautiful, it was very tough. It was a very tough period, the 20s and the 30s. But at the same time, they expressed through the Bund such loyalty to each other and such a caring for the workers and for the poor people. Their humanity was just amazing to me. And my mother always took me to these parties that they had. You know, they weren't parties, they were kind of gatherings. Anybody who remembers that period, there was always pound cake. There was tea and pound cake. And you know, and they would eat and talk and they would reminisce, and everything was jumbled up. They talked equally about the war and they talked equally about before the war. It wasn't just the war. And they talked with such passion. That's where I learned my Bundism, and that totally stuck with me. And I think also the fact that those conversations were always in Yiddish. And there was a connection to me about the politics and the Yiddish that sort of remained to a certain extent. I just didn't know people that talked American politics to each other until I was maybe in my late 30s or mid 30s. All intellectual and political conversation around my mother's had taken place in Yiddish.
Wow. I'm wondering if you can say a bit more about those politics that you were exposed to, and especially what that means to you, you know, today in 2022, to sort of, you know, carry on the legacy of secular left-wing Jewishness, of the Bund, of Jewish socialism from that period.
Well, I mean, you know, I put in my bio that I am a practicing secular Jew, because I feel like sometimes people think that if you're a secular Jew, you do nothing. And one of the things that I learned from the Bund is that if you're that secularism was a very active thing. It wasn't something that you just didn't do. It wasn't a question of just not going to shul or not going to not being a Zionist. A lot of people nowadays think they're Bundists because they're anti-Zionist. That's not the definition of a Bundist. I mean, that's one element of a very complicated group of ideas. And what stuck with me was their awareness of the needs of society, that you had to be aware of what was going on around you and what needed fixing. And they had a passion for that. And they were they were incredibly industrious. I mean, the Bund, was founded in 1897. So we're talking about a 40-year-old movement by then. It's very young, but they already at that point had schools and theater and athletic things and a sanatorium, the Medem Sanatorium. They were just, when they saw a need, they didn't kvetch about it, they addressed it and they created an institution. And in many ways, I have to say that when I became active in the lesbian feminist movement, the excitement that I felt in that movement, to me, in my mind, paralleled what the excitement that the Bundists in the 30s were experiencing when they were doing things.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting that you found that connection.
Yeah, I always thought that that's one of the reasons that I felt there was this passion, because I mean, in the lesbian feminist movement, we did that. We saw there were problems and we wanted to address them, and we did. Not just the lesbian, but the feminist and lesbian feminist movement. We didn't always do it perfectly, and we had a lot of gaps and all of that, but that energy of establishing all kinds of institutions that are still around now, I felt I was experiencing maybe a kind of excitement that generation, that Jewish generation in interwar Poland experienced.
When you talk about the connection between, say, Bundist activism and lesbian activism, was that something also that existed for you, like as it was happening? Like, did your lesbian activism and your Jewish communal life overlap? And how was your identity as a lesbian, how was that received in the Jewish communities that you were in at the time?
In 2 words, not well. In the 70s, none of that kind of announcement was received very well by most communities, in minority communities and in the general community. I think with the Jewish community, and it was one of the big disappointments of my life that I experienced that with them. My mother was very upset for a very long time. It took her a long time to accept it. I think it took a long time in general, though in terms of history, looking back, I think it was actually quite quick, because by the 90s, I came out in 73, which was 4 years after Stonewall. It was in terms of that history, it was very early. 20 years later was Klez Camp, and a Klez Camp, I mean, was rich with gay and lesbian participants. And the klezmer revival was going full blast, and it was very integrated. But at the time that I came out, I was pretty closeted. I had a lot of problems, and I eventually actually withdrew for a number of years because I didn't like the homophobia, and immersed myself basically in the lesbian community. I don't know if people realize that all my writing has until this book has been either in feminist or lesbian feminist publishers. My poem Bashert, that a lot of people admire, was first published in Sinister Wisdom. Adrian Rich and Michelle Cliff were the editors, and they published the whole thing. It's a very long poem, it's 12 pages. They gave me the whole space. The Tribe of Dinah was published originally as a double issue of Sinister Wisdom. My other work was published by the lesbian feminist press Persephone, then by the feminist press, Eighth Mountain Press, which was run by a lesbian. Found Treasures, the first book of Yiddish poetry, of Yiddish women's prose, was published by Second Story Press in Canada, which was a feminist press. So, I mean, there was a lot happened outside of the Jewish community that was about Jewish material.
Mm-hmm.
and there was room for it. And I don't think I would have really had any kind of writing, if you want to call it a career, because it's pretty spotty, without that lesbian beginning.
Well, thank you. I want to take a second just to mention to all of you watching tonight, we're going to be taking questions from you, the audience, later on in this program. So we're going to open up the chat, and please feel free to submit a question. We will be taking a couple of them for Irena to answer later. And then, Irena, just one more question that I've got for you now. The Trump years woke a lot of people up to the dangers of the far right. You know, we're talking about fascism, and whether or not, you know, one agrees to use that term to what's going on today. I think one thing it's really hard to deny is we see the rise of an ideology that is anti-gay, anti-trans, anti-Semitic, anti-basically everything that we stand for. Can you speak a bit to the link between anti-LGBTQ and anti-Semitic politics as you've observed it, whether in the US, globally, and you know, if there's any lessons from your writing or involvement with social movements on how we might fight back?
Well, you know, prejudice is usually, I mean, it would be, to me, very unusual, usually what I call a package deal. You don't just usually hate one group. Usually, if you really, really hate one group, you probably hate a lot of others that are close to it in some way. So I don't think isolating just, you know, gay or trans phobia with anti-Semitism is, you know, why detach it from racism? Why detach it, you know, from other kind of hateful attitudes about things? I think that this country sometimes, what happens, I think, in the country, and that makes certain groups for the moment feel safe, is that there's enormous focus on one particular group. And so it seems like the other groups are safe, but they're never safe. It's just that the focus is on one person. This is a package deal. Even if some event has nothing to do with anti-Semitism, but is an expression of some kind of hatred and prejudice, Jews should be standing up against it and for that group, even if Jews are not at that moment the ones that are being focused. And that works the other way around. If something is anti-Semitic, we should expect other groups to stand up and support us. So I think they're entangled. I think they're forever, you know, Trump can claim his daughter is Jewish and his son-in-law is whatever. He's, you know, he's a hateful he's an anti-everything. There's nothing he's not against except himself. So I wouldn't separate it into that kind of, into those divisions. I think it's a whole intertwined mess of really hateful attitudes towards people. And we're seeing more and more of it. And it's something that we have to stand up. And I think the main answer, and almost the only answer, is you can't fight this singly. You have to do it in coalition with other groups. No single group can do it alone. I think you all have to, we have to learn, and we don't really know. I think coalition building is very difficult.
Well, you know, the old lefties said an injury to one is an injury to all, right? And that definitely resonates with us here at the Workers' Circle. So thank you, Irena, for sharing so generously with us, really, you know, about your life, about your work. We're going to shift now to the next portion of our program, which will feature Irena reading selections from her own poetry. After that, we'll do the quick Q&A that I mentioned with questions from the audience right before wrap. So without further ado, I am going to hand it back to you, Irena, to share with us some selections from your poetry.
I'm going to start with a poem called Damama Shabbosim, my mother's cemetery, just because it feels homey to me. And there are some people in the audience here who I think are from the Bronx, so they'll recognize some things here. This was inspired by, I don't know how many people know the wonderful Yiddish writer Chaim Grada. He was a wonderful poet, novelist, essayist, and memoirist. And he wrote a memoir about his mother, Bella Gada, who was a very pious widow who was having a horrible, horrible time trying to raise this rebellious son. She was earning a living by selling apples in the street. And it made me think about my mother. Bella Gada was very, very Orthodox, and a lot of the stories, is around her observances of the Sabbath, of Shabbos. So I wanted to write about my mother's struggles. Of course, we weren't observant. We were secular, but I didn't let that bother me. So this is called Der Mama Shabbosim, my mother's Sabbath days. Bei uns ist es gewesen anders. I knew nothing of the 613 mitzvahs which did not bind me, nor of the 3 which did, though I'm sure my grandmother, Rikla Perchikov, knew them all, and I have a vague image of her covering her eyes and swaying. Shoshana, Brushka, Lodja, Mama Law, and more recently Rose, in short, my mother, in all her reincarnations, did not pass on such things. She'd given them up even before she'd ever claimed them. She was more modern, and besides, there were other matters to teach. So by age 11, ich bin schon gewesen als brennendicke Sozialistke. I was a passionate socialist, impatient, so impatient to grow into my knowledge, never guessing there was no choice for work and rest, wrestled in every human life, with work inevitably the unbeatable winner. So for us, it was different. Erev Shabbos was plain Freitag, or more precisely Piontek. I remember summer evenings, I would wait for her at the Mashu stop of the Lexington line. Bright heat and light at 6 o'clock. She was full of tales of Miss Kant, the designer, a career woman longing for home and family, in love with a handsome pilot. Of Scotty, the model who married smart, a wealthy buyer, and now sat brazenly chic in a reform synagogue. I listened, eager to understand these widow tales of romance amid the rush of each season's showing, and once even saw on a page of the Times a mannequin dressed in the very gown Mama Law had made. All the way up Jerome Avenue, we'd walk past the Jewish deli where we never ate. What was the point if you could make it at home? Past the pizza place where occasionally while shopping, she'd buy me a slice. Past the outdoor groceries, fruit stands, fabric, shoes, lingerie, and stationery stores, till Gun Hill Road and Jade Gardens. Perhaps I knew it was treif. She certainly did, but was not concerned. We'd order the salty wonton soup, chow mein, or pepper steak, and though she mocked the food, she never resisted. It was Friday, the shop was closed. We'd eat dinner, and like the rich, leaned leisurely back in our booth. I didn't know it was Erev Shabbos. Still, she rested. This next poem is about the writer, the Yiddish writer, Fadl Stock, who always interested me because she actually, unlike probably any of the major Yiddish writers, she actually tried writing in English at one point and wrote an entire novel that was actually published, which I read, and I was quite disappointed in it. But it interested me that she actually tried, and what that issue for me was a very important one. It was, English was sort of my 4th language and was kind of confusing. So this is a poem sort of trying, in Fadl Stock's voice, trying to think about the issue of language. The poem assumes that she died in a mental institution, which was what was known at the time that I wrote the poem, but it turned out that it wasn't true. On the other hand, this is a poem, it's not her voice, so I'm leaving it as it is. So this is Fadenstock thinking about her language and about her situation. They make it sound easy, some disjointed sentences, a few allusions to mankind. But for me, it was not so simple, more like trying to cover the distance from here to the corner or between two sounds. Think of it, heim and home. The meaning the same, of course, exactly, but the shift in vowel was the ocean in which I drowned. I tried, I did try. First held with Yiddish, but you know, it's hard. You write gas and street echoes back, no resonance. And let's face it, memory falters. You try to keep track of the difference, like Gott and God, or Huis and house, but they blur, and you start using alley when you mean Gesela, or avenue when it's a boulevard. And before you know it, you're on some alien path standing before a brick house, the door frame slightly familiar. Still, you can't place it exactly. Passers-by stop. Concerned, they speak, but you've heard all this before, the vowels shifting up and down, the subtle change in the guttural sounds, and now it's nothing more than babble. And so you accept it, you're lost. This time, you really don't know where you are. Land or sea, the house floats before you. Perhaps you once sat at that window and it was home and looked out on that street or Gesela. Perhaps it was a dead end, perhaps a shortcut, perhaps not. A movement by the door. They stand there beckoning, mouths open and close. Come in, come in. I understood it was a welcome. A dank, I said, till I heard the lock snap behind me. I think I'm gonna read just one more. Because I'm gonna read the last poem from the new collection. It's called De Fremde in de Fremd. You'll understand what it means. The Yiddish is translated. De Fremde in de Fremd. Gedenkst, do you remember when you were a stranger among strangers? A Fremde on Papieren, a stranger without papers. Gedenkst die Frages, those endless questions. Wer seid ihr? Von wann kommt ihr? Who are you? Where are you from? Why are you here and not there? Wer seien gewesen eure Schreinen? Who were your neighbors? Where was the school? What work did you do? What can you do here that you couldn't do there? Noch einmal, for the third, fourth, fifth time. Wer seid ihr? Von wann kommt ihr? Who are you? Where are you from? Why are you here and not there? Wer ist der Mann? Wer ist die Frau? Who is this man? Who is this woman? Und die Papieren and their papers, und das Kind and this child, did you find it here or bring it from there? Do you have a passport for him, for her? Ein Kind, that one with the dark hair? Noch einmal, for the 10th, 11th, 12th time. Wer seid ihr? Von wann kommt ihr? Who are you? Where are you from? Why are you here and not there? Who do you know here? Who did you know there? Where will you sleep here? How did you sleep there? In eure Chaloimus, what did you dream of here? What did you dream of there? Where will you work here? What work did you do there? And why can't you just work there? Who's die Visa, die grüne Karte, der Passport, Visa, green card, passport, photo from here and from there. And why did you cut your hair? Und das Kind, and why did you bring this child here and not leave it there? Noch einmal for the 18th, 19th, 20th time. Wann seid ihr? Von wann kommt ihr? Für was seid ihr dort geblieben? Für was seid ihr da und nicht geblieben dort? Why are you here? And why didn't you just stay there? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irena, for that presentation. Words and poems, both old and new. In listening to some of your words, I really could feel what Adrian Rich said about your work, and just sort of feel like we're doing cultural recreation in real time. So thank you again. And we are going to turn to the audience now and field a couple questions from all of you. So there was one thing I just wanted to make sure you saw, Irena, not a question, but Sherry Gorelick said, as a Bronx girl, I love the poem Jerome Avenue, the Deli. She had a smiley emoji. So I'm from Brooklyn, but still wanted to convey that Bronx solidarity.
I knew there'd be a lot of Bronx people here.
Good. May we represent all the boroughs and beyond. Question from Naomi. Naomi says, I loved what you said about being a practicing secular Jew. Can you say more about what you think of as distinctively Jewish about that way of being in the world?
What, being secular? I mean, I guess being secular, what that means?
Yeah, I guess I'll interpret, and Naomi, you can chime in, but I think being a practicing secular Jew, and what's, some might say, oh, well, in the absence of following the Torah or so on, I guess what's distinctively Jewish about it to you?
I think what's distinctively Jewish about it is being engaged with Jewish history and Jewish condition. It seems to me that what the Bund did, I mean, the Bund was a socialist organization, but it was very also focused on enabling and helping Jews. They saw that Jews were very, very poor. They saw the working Jews. I mean, I think it's important to be engaged with the community in some form. And this is not just for Jewish Ashkenazi Yiddishists. It's for anybody. I mean, you can be a secular Sephardic Jew. I mean, it's not just an Ashkenazi phenomenon. I come from the Bund, and it's my tradition. Other people have their own traditions, secular traditions, cultural traditions. I mean, for me personally, it means being connected in some form with Yiddish, being concerned with, like I say, Jewish history, being concerned with Israel and Palestine, what's going on there, being concerned about anti-Semitism here, and being concerned about the world. That means also being concerned about racism, homophobia. It's being engaged as a Jew who's also concerned. I mean, I feel very often, I think one of the big tensions has been Jews in the left who are really reluctant to engage with Jews. They were more comfortable with engaging with causes that were not Jewish for them, that did not seem to involve Jews in some way. So they may be engaged a lot with racism, but they don't want to be engaged with anti-Semitism, for example, or with Yiddish culture. It doesn't all have to be negative. For me, I think, in fact, if it was all negative, it would probably beat me down. It's because I enjoy Yiddish, and because I enjoy Yiddish literature and Jewish culture, Yiddish culture, that's what keeps me going. What we talked about, the opening question that you gave me. So that's what I think a practicing secular Jew is. It's not a specific thing. It's an engagement on various levels, but including engagement with other Jews.
Thank you for that. It's a very powerful distillation of what that could mean to be a practicing secular Jew, something that people after all this time have a great deal of confusion about. Because like you say, you've got to do it yourself, but there's power there too, maybe. Naomi. Sorry.
You don't do it alone, though. I mean, it's not it's not something that you do. You do it with other people.
Mm.
You have your own rituals and you have your own, it's not any one specific, it's not like there's a formula. I think we can, and this is true of observant Jews as well. Everybody makes up their own. I mean, you have these intentional communities. You have all different forms of conservatism. You have different forms of reform. I mean, it's not all that rigid. People, it's very, I don't know if it was that way always in Europe, but it's in America, it's really do it yourself, kind of adapted to the way you want it.
Yeah. Naomi, who asked that question, says that it struck her as being a mensch, a seriously good person, but says your answer gets what is so Jewish about it. Thanks you. And also said, I love the connection between a particular culture, Yiddish, etc., and being universalist in one's political and moral commitments. And I'll just say, I mean, that's something that strikes me so powerful about our tradition as well, that we can do that. We can access the universal through the particular in that way. Like you say, it's not even just limited to being Ashkenazi. Yeah.
It's one of the reasons I know there are some people like artists that don't want to be labeled either lesbian or Jewish or don't, go away from labels. I don't shy away from labels. I think the deeper you go into whatever label it is, the more real it is and the richer it is. And it's richer not only for you, but it's richer for all the people who either look at your art or read you. That I think it's important to really put your foot into your own ground.
We've got a couple more questions. This one's from Lawrence, who says, not every poet writing in two languages combines them as artfully, as beautiful as you do with English and Yiddish. I'm wondering whether you have thoughts about how that combining works or doesn't work, how you make it work, etc.
I wish I knew. I'd do it more if I knew it. I don't do it enough. I think people want me to do it more. It's very, very hard. It's much harder than writing other poetry. I mean, I do a prose writing and I incorporate Yiddish into my prose much more easily than I do into poetry. I mean, in poetry, I say this all the time, you really want to let go when you're writing poetry. And because I'm not 100% bilingual in Yiddish, I have to really stop and think. And the last thing you want to do when you're writing poetry is think. I mean, you want to really stop thinking. You sort of want to get into the zone and kind of float away. So it's very difficult. I appreciate the compliment, but I really don't have a formula, and it's very tricky. That last poem that I read was probably the most recent I did, and one of the reasons I did it was because I liked in Yiddish. I had that, I was thinking a lot about it. It was when Trump was doing all the horrible stuff at the border, and I was thinking a lot about immigration. And in Yiddish, der Fremder in der Fremd has such a wonderful, because the root there is fremd, and fremd just can mean strange or alien or not at home or something. So a Fremder is a stranger. A Fremder in der Fremd is a stranger in a strange place. But in Yiddish, you can't duplicate that in English. But it just, that was where the poem began with that Yiddish phrase. A lot of my poems begin with their titles, and I sort of build from that. So it was just for me, it felt satisfying, but it's very hard to do, and I don't do it as often as I'd like to do it.
Thanks for sharing and being so candid about your process. Now we've got the chat is blowing up, and I love to see it. Everyone's active and engaged. We're not going to get to everyone's question, but we are going to do a couple more. I'm going to read one from Karen Gould, who says, "Thank you for your presentation. Can you comment on your experience being an educator in the criminal legal system?"
There's not much to comment on. I mean, I taught at Bedford Hills for 10 years. I taught English and composition and women's studies, a little bit of history, a variety. It was a very, it's really important I mean, it's sort of an understatement. It's really important to reform the prison system in the United States. I mean, Bedford Hills was definitely one of the better places. And there were, my students were very lucky to have the opportunity to study. And I mean, the horror of it is that a lot of them would never have gone to college if they hadn't gone to prison, which is just insane. And you know, we know about the injustice system in this country. We know about plea bargaining and all of that. And everything that we know, let me tell you, it's much worse than what we know or what we think or what we imagine. It's a completely unfair system. It's not about justice. It's not about anything. It's very arbitrary. And it was very, very shocking. And it was, for me, it was a wonderful opportunity to be able to go in and give something to these women who could only take classes at night. They all work during the day. They have jobs in the prison, who couldn't own their books, had to use little stick-ons to take notes on them because nobody could, you had to pass the book on to somebody else. It requires an enormous amount of effort, I think, but it's got to change. And it was very humbling to me to be in there. I thought it was really a privilege, and I don't say that lightly. I mean, I could not believe that these women have what they were able to achieve under the circumstances that they were living in. So it was a transforming experience for me. It was probably the most significant teaching that I feel that I've done.
Thanks, Irena. There's a lot of people in the chat who are asking specifically to touch on the question of gender identity. You know, could you touch a bit on this, and maybe even some of the tensions that have existed as far as the feminist movement from decades ago and between gay and lesbian and trans people and progress that's been made in the last years.
Wow. What can I say? I know that there are tremendous tensions. Very honestly, I don't understand them. I really don't understand them. To me, it's another form of a kind of bigotry with, it's interesting when lesbianism became an issue, the mainstream feminist movement under Betty Friedan just didn't want lesbians to come out, because feminists were already being called lesbians. Straight feminists were being called man-haters and lesbians. So there was this tension, enormous tension between straight women and lesbians. This was in the 70s and 80s. Now there's this tension between, I think, lesbians and trans women and trans lesbians, all kinds of, and I don't know whether it's similar. It's very disturbing. I don't totally understand it. I can't really give you an answer to it. There's a sense of feeling of erasure of some sort. I don't really know. I have friends. I have friends that I can barely talk to about this topic. I mean, it's the same. It's as toxic as talking about, with Trump people about something. It's a very toxic topic, and I feel bad that I can't really give you an answer to it. I mean, I'm sure that there are other people that understand it better. I just don't understand it. I've tried talking to people and I've gotten nowhere. So how this is going to end, I don't know. But it's to me, it's very, very sad. And I don't know. I hope it peters out eventually, because I think out there, right now, the atmosphere towards trans people especially is it's terrible in this country right now, what's happening. I mean, if you see with the laws being passed in Texas, it's horrifying. And really, we should be supporting people. We should not be on the other side. And unfortunately, this has happened before. We split on issues, other issues before. We split on pornography. There were very bitter issues. There's bitter issues between, like I say, between heterosexuals and lesbians. I don't know. I don't have the answer for you. I wish I did, but I don't.
Well, thanks again for your candor. And, I think it's important for us not to shy away from the issues that do exist so that we can have stronger movements. I will just quickly plug that on Sunday, the Workers' Circle is going to be in Foley Square at the Queer Liberation March. And that's going to be LGBTQI plus everyone under that banner. And so we're doing the work of trying to, address and also, I guess maybe heal some of these divisions in real time. And for our New York City folks, if anyone can make it, please join our contingent. So we are just 3 minutes from 8 o'clock. I'm sure that we will have another program in the future and folks can come back and we'll have more questions then. I did want to quickly say before we close out, just to relay some Hamisha comments. Rabbi Paula says that their grandfather owned the Jewish bakery on Jerome Avenue. So I thought you'd appreciate that, right? And Eileen Kroll says that I worked with your mom at the JDC in the late 70s. She made a lasting impression on me. So, yeah. Well, thank you everyone for your questions. And, I think this has been really beautiful and challenging at times, but really sustaining. And Irena, I'll just let you have the last word as we conclude our program tonight.
Okay, I thought that the last word for the Workers' Circle should be in Yiddish. So I'm just going to read a short poem by the wonderful Yiddish poet Rachel Korn. And I'm going to read first my translation in English, and then I'm going to read it in Yiddish. It's called From Jener Seit Lied, on the poem's other side. On the poem's other side, there's a secret, an orchard and a house with a roof of thatch. 3 pines stand communing in silence, 3 sentinels posted on an eternal watch. On the poem's other side, there's a bird with a yellow-brown feathers, a bright red breast. Every winter it flies to this orchard and sits like a bud on its barren nest. On the poem's other side, there's a road sliced narrow, thin, so razor sharp, fine, and there someone wanders barefoot and mute, a ghost lost along the passage of time. On the poem's other side, wondrous things can occur, even now in this hour clouded and gray, as it presses against the pane of the glass, the feverish longing of a wounded day. On the poem's other side, my mother stands wrapped in the doorway a moment in the fading light and calls me home like long ago, long ago. Enough play now, don't you see? It's night. Von jener Seit Lied is a Sod voran und in Sod is a Haus mit a streuenem Dach. Es stehen 3 Sosnes und schweigen sich aus, 3 Schomrim auf ständiger Wach. Von jener Seit Lied is a Vogel voran, a Vogel bräungel mit a reutlicher Brust. Kommt dort zu fliehen jeden Winter auf Snei und hängt wie a Knosp auf dem nackten Kust. Von jener Seit Lied ist a Steschke voran, a so schmal und scharf wie der dienster Schnitt. Und Emmets, was hat sich verblonget in Zeit, geht dort mit Stille und Bauwasser tritt. Von jener Seit Lied können Wunder geschehen, noch heint in a Tag, was es chmarne und grau, wenn defekt rein in der Gloss von der Scheub die zerfieberte Bänkschaft von a wunderker Show. Von jener Seit Lied kann mein Mama heraus und stehen auf der Schwell a Weile vertracht und mich rufen nach heim wie amol, genug sich gespielt schon, Du siehst nicht, es ist Nacht. Schönen Dank.
Thank you, Irena. Folks, I actually just had one more quick thing to say. I know we're at 8:01. I'll be quick. I just wanted to thank Irena again from the bottom of my heart. Always such a privilege to talk with you, to hear from you. I want to thank all our co-sponsors, who you can see right over here, fantastic organizations of many different kinds. And thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. Now, following this program, you're going to receive an email with a recording of the program and also instructions on how to pre-order Irena's forthcoming book, Her Birth in Later Years, New and Collected Poems, 1971 to 2021. And you can get it at a discount, no less. We will be sharing the discount code with you. And as part of our collective project of cultural recreation for a more just world, if you're in the New York City area, I'm just going to say again, special invitation for you to join the Workers' Circle this Sunday, June 26th, Queer Liberation March. We're going to reignite the legacy of Stonewall and reclaim the spirit and meaning of Pride so that it better represents the LGBTQIA community and its rights. On behalf of the Workers' Circle, good night and seid gesund und stark. Please be healthy and strong. Take care.